If you don't know, Final Fantasy Tactics came out for the PlayStation 1 back in the late 90s. It's hailed as one of the most quintessential tactical role-playing games ever. It was re-released for the PlayStation Portable as Final Fantasy Tactics: The War of the Lions, with some additional features included. I'm going to split this review into two parts. The first part is reviewing Final Fantasy Tactics, while the second is reviewing The War of the Lions, and how it differs from the original PlayStation game. Let's begin. I agree that Final Fantasy Tactics is a must-have essential game for all tactical role-playing fans. However, I'm not going to be just a screaming devoted fan. This game does have some flaws, as I'll explain. Let's start with the gameplay. I'm not going to give you a tutorial on how these games are played. I'll assume you understand the style of isometrical tactical role-playing games. In this game there are 22 jobs, or as I call them, classes. Each class functions differently. A knight has massive hit points and strong attack damage. Time mages cast haste, slow, teleportation, etc. Black mages cast spells like fire and ice. If you're familiar with the style of customization, then you understand the range of classes and what they represent. After every action in the game that alters an ally's or enemy's stats, you gain experience to gain a level, and job points to put into your job or class to learn new abilities. Along with getting job points, you can also level that class. If you level the right classes, you can unlock a new class. I'll give you an example. If you reach level 2 with your Squire class, you can then change that character class to a Knight class. It's a fully customizable experience with hundreds of potential abilities. Along with using a main class, you can equip passive abilities and even a secondary class to use on the battlefield. Which leads me to my very first complaint. Not all the classes are useful. Some jobs are painful to work through, such as like the Thief or the Mystic and a few others. The main reason to change to those specific classes is just to unlock a more superior class. You may need to level up your Thief to a job level of 4, which creates a very anti-fun mechanic when you're not enjoying the state of your character. They should have balanced each class to have all equally fun mechanics. You would never choose a Thief over a Monk, an Archer over a Ninja, or a Squire over a Dragoon. This game will give you two types of characters. There are the generic characters that don't talk, don't have personalities, and all look exactly the same. They are simply tools just to test out the different customization features in the game. You'll be using these types of characters for the first half of the game until you acquire the other type of character. The other type of character are storyline unique characters that join your team. They do talk, they have personalities, and are generally relevant to the story in some way. They come with their own unique class. Although you can change their class as well, you'll find that their uniqueness is superior and you will only customize them to an extent just to gain some passive abilities like Auto Potion. Which leads me to my second issue with the game. You'll more than likely end up using a full cast of unique characters by the end of the game. All those hours and hours and hours you spent customizing a generic character to becoming a summoner may all be in vain by the end of the game because they become inferior and you'd rather use characters like Orlando. My third flaw in the game is that the more you play, the more you'll realize it's more efficient just to attack your own characters or cast minimal spells just so you can build your levels. If you attack yourself, you gain just as much job points as if you're attacking an enemy. The game could have had better incentive to destroy the enemies without taking these little shortcuts, perhaps given bonus job points for completing the mission in a set amount of time. Something to keep the game played the way it should be. The system is easy to exploit, and you'll find yourself sitting in the corner of the map beating on your own characters just to gain a few levels. Let's move on to the storyline. The game is wonderfully told, but poorly executed. You have the main character who is, for the most part, is just, loyal, and fights for goodness. He, and along with the majority of characters, don't really have fleshed out personalities. However, unlike Jeanne d'Arc, there are a few very intriguing multifaceted characters such as Delita. The rest of the plot is interweaved with an intricate maze of politics and who will win control of the kingdom. There is a best friend turned enemy turned ally, turned savior of the world. One of your half-brothers conspires with the Duke. There is a princess who really isn't a princess. There are allies that turns into bosses. There are some enemies you sympathize with. This is barely scratching the surface. The story itself is wonderful and as intricate as a complex fantasy novel. However, I feel that with the updated dialogue in the game, they could have had an opportunity to really develop some of the characters in the game. And of course the game is ported from the original PlayStation, so the graphical of its time do restrict the game from being fully realized. For instance, one of the things I always found interesting is that each battle takes place on a square or a rectangular plane like it's floating in the air. The world is literally flat in the battles, like if you dived off the side, you'd fall into the sun. It's not distracting, but it's also not an engaging world. Outside of the battles, the world map is basically picking points on the map to walk. I personally sort of miss the Shining Force games where you had the freedom to walk around. It's a much more engaging experience where you feel like you have a part of what's going on. Selecting points on a map to continue a dialogue-driven storyline sacrifices certain connections to the atmosphere of the game. I would like to move on to the difficulty level of the game. I enjoy challenging games, and this game can definitely be challenging. However, there is a climax where once you reach this point, it becomes the most difficult part of the game, and every battle after that is quite a bit easier, even the last boss. Another problem is that there are a couple save options in the game that are very unforgiving. If you choose to only have one save slot and absolutely cannot beat the boss, you're stuck, and you don't have an opportunity to level up your characters. You either keep trying or start over. This is another anti-fun mechanic that could potentially ruin your experience if you're not prepared. So now I'm going to be reviewing the War of the Lions and the additions it makes to the PSP version from the original game. The first addition I'd like to talk about is the updated dialogue. They've decided to go with a more Shakespearean form of dialogue. At times I found it a little bit distracting and unnecessary. I've read reviews of people saying that they've enjoyed the change and it's an easier storyline to follow. I found the dialogue to at times be excessively cryptic, more so than the original. They've also changed around some names, classes, names of characters, names of items, and so on. A lot of it seemed unnecessary. I understand that there was this overall theme to keep the game with this medieval Shakespearean setting, but I'm dumb, and I wish the dialogue was a little bit more easier to digest. The second addition is there are two jobs added to this version. There's the Onion Knight and the Dark Knight. They decided that these two jobs are endgame or postgame. It's almost impossible to reach the full potential of these classes just by going through the game at a normal pace. They're really an afterthought, or I want to do a side quest now that the game is beat. They aren't easy enough to master to change the dynamics of the game while you're playing through. Maybe that's just me though, and I've never really had the patience for large achievements outside of beating the game. The third addition is the graphical updates and the slowdowns. First, let's talk about the slowdowns. Basically, every time there is a light particle on the screen, the game comes to a drag for a few seconds to let it render. Towards the end of the game, I got used to it. Let me tell you though, casting spells like heal that use light particles is really frustrating. You almost get to the point where you don't want to use any abilities at all and just stick to melee attacks. I don't know what Square was thinking and why the game wasn't more fully polished. Apparently the iPad release of the game has a fix for the issue. Too bad they didn't release it for the PSP. One graphical addition they did a great job at was the gorgeously done cinematics. The videos are rendered using cel shading, a technique given the illusion of hand-drawn animation. I found it to be very beautiful. The cinematics have this sort of grainy anime feel to them that contribute to the overall style and feel to the story. One of the most impressive additives to the War of the Lions. I do have one minor complaint though. The very last scene in the game, one with one of the greatest twists to the development of Delita, was not made into a cinematic. Oh, that's frustrating, but woe is me. There are some extra scenes in the game. For instance, one scene is Delita fighting off two ninjas to protect the princess. These scenes do add some additional narrative to the overall storyline. They aren't necessarily needed, but if you played through the original game a million times, it's definitely nice to have a little bit of a change. There are also two additional characters in the game. There's a Sky Pirate Balthier, I hope I pronounced that right, and Luso. Both characters are from other Final Fantasy games. One is slightly overpowered, while the other is strong enough to use and to poach with. Overall, I do recommend the game. I'm a hard critic, so even though I listed several problems I had with the game, I still found the game overall to be a joy. Maybe it's just nostalgia, who knows, but I give Final Fantasy Tactics: The War of the Lions an 8.5 out of 10.